Revere under attack. It appears that the regressive left finally figured out who's been messing up the works for them for the last couple of years, and they are coming for us YouTubers. As I'm sure you're already aware, the mainstream media has been painting YouTube as a hub of hate speech, and pressuring big companies not to advertise on the platform. Many companies have pulled their ads, and YouTube is scrambling to try to save itself, demonetizing videos left and right. The channels who are hit the most are those of our community, those who try to deal with sensitive subjects, and many people's livelihood is now in jeopardy. Everyone has been making videos on how we should deal with this situation. I'd like to do what I do, which is to take a broader historical perspective, tell a story, and from that draw conclusions on how we should react. Now, you may recall, when I first decided to try to make money off this channel, I said this: seeing what's been going on lately on YouTube with other content creators, I'm not even going to try to monetize my videos. Instead, I've opened a Patreon account, and you can support me there and become a patron. And I said it because I knew what was coming. This was what always happens. Whenever there's a new artistic medium, it serves as a platform for a new rebellious generation to present a new rationality, destroying the old rotten rationality. And the old guard is always terrified by it, describing it as a force that is corrupting the youth. Many have been saying that the mainstream media attack on YouTube is for financial reasons, as they've realized that YouTube is rapidly replacing them as a source of news and information. My view is not that cynical. I'm sure the financial aspect is part of it, because money always plays some part in our actions and decisions, but I believe most people are driven mainly by other values. I see it primarily as an ideological attack, and I think that the people behind it believe that they are in an ideological battle, and that they must win it to save the world. Others, who are not part of the SJW ideology, are simply buying into the narrative that we are experiencing a rise in extreme hate groups, a rise fueled by YouTube, that needs to be stopped. Be it as it may, the bottom line is that they are trying to destroy us, and we'd better do something about it. You know what we gotta do?
Toga party.
Exactly, we should have a toga party. Let me explain what I mean, by recounting a story from another time there was a situation like this. Let's go back to the early 1950s, when two young guys called Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller met in Los Angeles and formed a partnership. Lieber was a lyricist, Stoller a composer, and together they formed a songwriting duo. Typically for Jewish American kids at the time, they had a leftist worldview, and they felt sympathy for other minority groups. They were particularly interested in the culture of black Americans, so much so that Lieber borrowed from black slang for his lyrics, and Stoller composed in rhythm and blues style. In 1953 they wrote a song called Hound, which is sung by a woman who is throwing out her husband because he is a no-good bum. The song was recorded by Big Mama Thronton, and became a hit on the rhythm and blues charts. Excited, our two young heroes told their leftist friends about their success, and received a cold shower. Pop music, the Marxist-influenced friends told them, is a capitalist ploy to sedate the masses, and anyone taking part in it is just cooperating with our enslavement. Lieber and Stoller realized that the ideological left doesn't really care about black people and their struggle, but just regards them as pawns in its grand revolutionary plan. So they bid farewell to this type of leftism, and set out on their way to create a new attitude that would be part of a much better leftist approach. Their next classic came out in 1954, performed by a black doo-wop group called the Robins. The record is called Riot in Cell Block No. 9, and it tells of a riot that breaks out in a prison cell. This is a common left-wing metaphor, except the prisoners here don't seem interested in escaping to freedom. They are just having a party, a non-stop wild party full of chaos, hijinks and anarchic mirth. The excitement and fun are delivered perfectly by the great bass voice of lead singer Richard Berry, with some added sound effects and dramatic sax that take us right into this pandemonium that is happening in a place where there should be no fun or disorder. It lasts for 48 hours, until the authorities finally manage to bring order back. But the record ends up by telling us that every now and then, a new riot breaks up, and we go through the whole thing again. The use of sound effects on the record was a pretty novel thing at the time. Until then, records were seen as a way to reproduce the sound of a live performance. For jazz musicians, adding something on top of the performance was considered cheating, and was frowned upon. But Lieber and Stoller belonged to a new generation, that regarded the record as an art piece in itself, a composition of studio-created sounds. The record company Atlantic realized their talent and brilliance, and signed them on a revolutionary contract, which gave them creative freedom over the production of their records, meaning that they didn't just write and compose the music, but also produce the record in the studio, determining how it was going to sound. Thus, they became the first independent record producers. Not everyone was this lucky. Most musicians at the time got screwed by the music industry, especially if they were black. Take Richard Berry, for instance. After his stint with the Robins on Riot in Cell Block No. 9, he continued his own career, and he even wrote and recorded a song called Louie, Louie. It is a cute sea chanty about a Jamaican sailor who is sailing home to his woman, and he sings about how much he misses her. It was good enough to become a local hit in the Los Angeles area, but Berry didn't think it would amount to anything more. So he sold the rights to the song to the record company, and felt very lucky with the $750 he got. The rest of the Robins, meantime, rebranded themselves as the Coasters, and under the guidance of Lieber and Stoller, formed a new identity. The records continued to be theatrical, dramatizing amusing stories out of real life, but the subject matter changed, from stories rooted in African American culture to stories taken mainly out of youth culture. The band started operating in 1955, the same year that the American public became aware that there's a new musical craze among the youth, called rock and roll. Rock and roll was basically black rhythm and blues transformed to make it accessible to white ears, with lyrics that appealed to the youth. This was a perfect style for Lieber and Stoller, and they combined the theatricality of the Coasters with the rhythmic ecstasy of rock and roll, and scored hit after hit. In the beginning of 1956, however, rock and roll was taken over by a new sensation. A 20-year-old called Elvis Presley was driving the girls wild all over the South, with his original style that combined country, rhythm and blues and pop, and with his enticing dance moves on the stage. At the end of 55 he was signed by a national record company, and merged his style with what was going on in the rock and roll scene. At some point, he added Lieber and Stoller's Hound to his repertoire, although he did it mainly as a joke, since it was after all meant for a female singer. It was a point on his show where he could just let go and act wild and ridiculous. When he appeared on national TV, on the Milton Berle show, Elvis did his routine with the song, and to put an exclamation point on the comedy, he ended it with some burlesque hip swiveling. The crowd on the show laughed and thought it was funny, but the next day reactions were something else altogether. A media storm ensued, generating a moral panic. Elvis, and rock and roll in general, were accused of degenerating and corrupting the youth. For a moment, it looked like Presley's career was over. The attack came from both the left and the right. For the conservative right, with its puritanical values, Elvis's hip motions meant allowing sinful sexuality into the world of their children, which of course they could not abide. The liberal left, meanwhile, was still involved in the grand project that characterized what today we call the modern era, the project of creating a wholly enlightened society. The idea was that man is progressing through history, towards creating a perfect society where every individual behaves in an enlightened way. And so, everything and everyone was supposed to be dedicated to this progress, and anything that was seen as negating it had to be defeated. So when Elvis came along with his dance moves that he appropriated from black entertainers, it suggested reversing the progress, going back to the jungle. Naturally, liberals were horrified by the idea that their kids, who are supposed to represent a more progressed generation, are listening to this atavistic music. So the rejection of rock and roll by the older generation was unanimous. A typical response to it can be found in this delightful depiction by Frank Sinatra, an older-style liberal. Sinatra, then considered the paragon of quality in popular music, said of rock and roll that it is the most brutal, ugly, degenerate, vicious form of expression it has been my displeasure to hear, and went on to say that it fosters almost totally negative and destructive reactions in young people. It smells phony and false. It is sung, played and written for the most part by cretinous goons and by means of its almost imbecilic reiteration and sly, lewd, in plain fact dirty, lyrics. And as I said before, it manages to be the martial music of every sideburn delinquent on the face of the earth. Rock and roll, then, became the scapegoat that was blamed for all of society's ills. If only rock and roll wasn't corrupting our kids, we could have a perfect society. And yet, the youth kept on being enthusiastic about this music, despite their parents' disapproval of it. For them, it didn't feel degenerate and corrupt at all. In fact, it felt like the only real thing in the phony and corrupt world that their parents had bequeathed them. But they couldn't quite explain why they felt this way. Rock and roll artists were called upon to write songs that will explain it, and Lieber and Stoller were among the first to rise up to the challenge. They got their chance when Elvis Presley himself contacted them and asked them to write music for him. Elvis and his manager were trying to improve his image, and signed a contract for Elvis to star in some Hollywood movies. Lieber and Stoller were signed to provide the soundtrack for the 1957 movie Jailhouse Rock, and provided the winning score. For the title track, they pretty much go back to the premise of Riot in Cell Block No. 9, with a song about a wild rock and roll party that breaks in a jailhouse. But it adds something new. In one of the verses, some prisoners notice that the commotion opens up a chance for escape, but they refuse to take it. They would rather stay in jail, where they can have the fun of having a riot inside the walls, than live freely on the outside. And this is where Lieber and Stoller were different from the Marxist friends, and where the logic of rock and roll was different from modern logic. The Marxists were part of the modern logic, and believed in creating the perfect society. But while most Western liberals thought that the way to get there was through the democratic process, which progresses slowly towards the goal, the Marxists regard liberal democracies as a prison designed to keep us enslaved forever. They dream of a revolution, which will take us out of the prison once and for all. But for the youth of the 1950s onwards, the whole modern ideal no longer made any sense. They felt like their society was already good enough, and now we should focus on finding ways to have fun. And one of the greatest ways to have fun is to rebel and have a riot that messes up the order we grew into, in the name of a new sensibility that only we can understand. While Marxists perceive freedom as a state you are in, a state where you have no chains, for the rock and roll kids freedom is a sensation, the sensation of dancing in your chains and breaking them. So it is better to remain in the prison of today's society, a society that is not perfect but allows you to express yourself and break your chains, than to live in that boring utopia that the Marxists have in mind. Lieber and Stoller, through Elvis, put forth this insight, which will characterize generations to come. As we can see, Elvis is still shaking his hips, but it is choreographed. It is no longer the rowdy ecstasy of Hound Dog. He found a way to remain faithful to his style, but make it more acceptable. Other rock and rollers, on the other hand, kept on walking on the wild side, and were eventually punished for it. With Elvis drafted and sent away for 2 years of military service, the establishment was ready to clamp down on rock and roll and its heroes. Chuck Berry, the great poet of rock and roll, was jailed for transporting a minor across state lines, and Jerry Lee Lewis, the wildest card in the deck, was disgraced after it came out that he married his 13-year-old cousin. But the real blow was what became known as the payola scandal. Payola, the illegal practice of record companies to pay radio stations to play their records, has been around for decades, and no one cared much until rock and roll came along. In 1959 it was made into a national scandal, and was regarded as proof of the corruption of rock and roll. At the end of the 50s, it seemed like rock and roll had died. Which meant that people working in rock and roll, like Lieber and Stoller, had to adjust. In 1959 they started working with the Drifters, one of the premier doo-wop bands, and the first record they did with them set rock and roll on a new path. It was still teen-oriented pop, still based on rhythm and blues, but it had the sophistication of symphonic music. In the early 60s, this is what rock and roll became, a more refined version of its former self, and in this form it was accepted by the establishment and became the new mainstream of pop. Because this is how free societies react to new and rebellious movements. Where dictatorships would quash you, incarcerate you or kill you, a free society incorporates you, allows you to cash in. When Elvis came back from the army, the first to welcome him back was none other than Frank Sinatra, who invited him to do a duet on his TV show. Because this is how most people in free societies act towards new movements. At first they are scared and repulsed, but then they realize that it's just another expression of freedom, like the renegade movements they belonged to when they were young. So the riot died down, and rock and roll became just another musical style. But the memory of those fun early years remained, and many wanted to recreate it. One place that retained the memory was the city of Seattle, where an independent musical scene evolved in the late 50s, keeping true to early rock and roll. Besides playing the known worn-out hits, the Seattle bands were digging up more obscure records to add to their repertoire, and one of those records was Richard Berry's Louie. The Seattle bands revived the song, and soon it became the unofficial anthem of the scene, the song that was sure to fill the dance floor. Soon, they turned it into a wild romp, the epitome of rock and roll rowdiness. when Paul Revere and the Raiders, the best Seattle band, shout at the beginning of their cover,
"Rock your woman, it's a Louie Louie time!"
you know that it's time to let go of your civilized inhibitions and revert to a troglodyte mindset. Another band on the scene was the Kingsmen, a group of teenagers from Portland who were regarded as a pretty shitty band by the Seattle crowd. But the Kingsmen thought they could amount to something, and one day in April 1963 they went into the studio to record their own version of Louie Louie. Before recording, however, they decided to do a run-through, just to check that the equipment is working. So they did a full performance of the song, and it was absolutely dreadful. Singer Jack Eli stood too far away from the microphone, rendering his vocals incomprehensible. Mike Mitchell's wacky guitar solo doesn't know where it wants to go, ending up being totally pointless. Lynn Easton, the drummer, made a mistake that threw him off the beat, and didn't really recover until the end of the song. The entire thing was a shambles. Well, it was just a warm-up anyway, and the band members were now ready to go ahead with the real thing. But their producer, in a stroke of genius, told them, no need to, this recording was great. And so, the legend of Louie Louie was born. The Kingsmen's Louie Louie is one of those things that are so bad they're good. Everyone who heard it back in 1963 thought it was absolutely hilarious. That in itself was enough to make it a hit, but it is more than just hilarious. It is also riotous, containing the anarchic spirit of early rock and roll. That is enough to make it a rock and roll classic. But then, there was something more, something that put Louie Louie above all else, and made it, in the eyes of many people, the greatest rock and roll record of all time. It is precisely the fact that it was recorded so badly that gave it the edge, because the unintelligibility of the words made it possible for anyone to attach their own words to it, and make it their own. If you are familiar with the original lyrics, you realize that they are what Eli is singing, but most listeners were not familiar with them, and soon enough, the rumor spread around that the reason you can't make out the lyrics is because they are dirty. In the extremely puritanical and sexually repressed America of the early 60s, hearing an allegedly obscene song over the airwaves was a call of liberation. In high schools all over the country, pages containing the supposedly real lyrics were passed from hand to hand, away from the watchful eyes of teachers and parents. Slowly, the record gained notoriety, eventually becoming a national, and then an international, phenomenon. By the second week of December, Louie Louie shot up to the second place in the Billboard chart, heralding the reawakening of rock and roll, its return to its wild roots. It set the standard for what became known as garage rock, music that didn't sound like the polished music made in the studios of Tin Pan Alley, but as if it was done by some drunk guys in a garage, just having a good time. It was still holding in second place at the fourth week of January 1964, but by then it had reinforcement. In the fourth place in the chart that week, we find another inimitable garage classic, Surfin' Bird by the Trashmen, perhaps the greatest exemplar of rock and roll's proud atavism. And sandwiched between these two garage monsters, in the third spot, we find the first entry from a certain band from England, a band that was about to take over the chart, in a stampede never seen before or since. The Beatles were the product of the Liverpool scene, another scene that remained faithful to the early and cool rock and roll. There were other such scenes in other UK cities, and once the Beatles invaded America, the other British bands joined the charge. Rock and roll was back, wilder and rowdier than ever, and now that it was embedded in the system, it could not be killed. Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis and all the other early rock and roll heroes were back to have illustrious lifelong careers, now regarded as the founding fathers, and many new heroes emerged, expanding on their blueprint. This was the beginning of what became known in our collective memory as the 60s, the decade that revolutionized everything. For more on this, check out my series on psychedelia. So the establishment had to accept rock and roll, and no longer try to kill it. But there was one thing that they did try to kill, and that was Louie Louie. Concerned parents kept on contacting the authorities, telling them about this song that is corrupting their children with its obscene lyrics. The rumor was that if you played the record at a different speed, the real lyrics can be deciphered. The FBI launched an investigation, and if they could prove foul play, the Kingsmen were facing the very serious charge of distributing pornography to minors. All the feds had to do was listen to the original Richard Berry record, and they would have realized that this is what the Kingsmen are singing as well. But they were too square, too clueless about the world of rock and roll, to think about this line of investigation. For 2.5 years the FBI Louie file remained open, as investigators used the most advanced technology to try to figure out what the hell they are singing, but to no avail. In the end, they submitted their report, and the delightful bottom line declared, unintelligible at any speed. Louie was the riot that could not be put down, because there were no legal grounds to put it down. It would become the Rosetta Stone of rock and roll, the key to its secret, the song that every rock and roll band had to play, and come up with its own way of performing it. In the coming decades, whenever one form of rock and roll ran out of steam, whenever the riot seemed to be dying down, someone would find a way to play Louie in a new manner, reinventing rock and roll and reigniting the riot. And in the process, generations of kids internalized the idea put forth by Lieber and Stoller, the idea that the goal is not to break out of the prison, but to have a party inside its walls. So whenever someone became worried because it seemed like the authorities are closing in and are about to shut down the fun, the answer was,
Got news for you, pal. They're gonna nail us no matter what we do. So we might as well have a good time. Toga, 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 toga.
The greatest years of rock and roll were between the 1950s and the 1970s. And this was also the time when Western intellectuals realized that the modern age has come to an end, because people are no longer buying the whole idea that they should dedicate everything to achieve the perfect society. The result was the rise of what is known as postmodernism, an attempt to articulate new attitudes. But the postmodernist thinkers were not listening to what was going on in popular music, so they failed to realize where the spirit of the time is going. They ultimately failed to draft any new worthwhile goals, and postmodernism devolved into meaningless prattle. In my view, since the 1960s we have been living in a new era, which I call the pop age. In this new paradigm, the goal is no longer to change the system, as we believe that liberal democracy is the best possible system. The goal is now to take advantage of the freedoms we have, and have a good time. And the best time is had when there is a new exciting and dangerous thing that comes up, and we rally around it, form a community that develops it, and fight to preserve it against those who are trying to repress it. We know that eventually it will be incorporated by the system, and the fun will be over. But that's okay. There will always be a new fun thing to rally around, and the riot will go on and on. And in the process, while having fun, you are also making society better. There is no better system than the liberal democratic system we have today, but that doesn't mean that this system can't be improved. These new movements give a voice to the voiceless, inspire lots of creativity, and replace stale ideas with fresh ones. When they are incorporated by the system, they revitalize society, increase the diversity and harmony in it, and enrich its culture with new masterpieces. This is how progress is achieved. And this is what Lieber and Stoller's radical leftist friends failed to understand, and what radicals fail to understand to this very day. Progress is achieved by a process of cultural exchange, which gradually increases the diversity and harmony in society. But radicals reinterpret this history, and believe that it was achieved by radical movements managing to get people to accept their ideas. That is why the radical leftists on YouTube refuse to change, even though their videos are getting almost universal scorn from the YouTube community. Because of their skewed vision of history, they believe that they will prevail in the end. And today's radicals are particularly sad, because they are a relic of the modern age, the only ones who still hold on to the discarded idea that we should transform our society into a perfect society. That is why the term regressive left is so apt. There's nothing really radical about their ideas anymore. They are just rehashing ideas from a bygone era, and they don't even realize it. The problem is, the rock and roll era is also over. The new thing is internet culture, and the establishment is as clueless about it as it was about rock and roll in the 50s and 60s. At the moment, YouTube is a big scary blob to them, and that is how the regressives manage to persuade them that there's something insidious going on. And so, they are coming for us, and many YouTubers are worried about their livelihood. Many others are afraid that this will end this movement that has brought us so much enjoyment in the last couple of years, and there will be no more fun of any kind. So I made this detour through the history of rock and roll, to tell you not to worry, and just keep on going. Yes, we are being financially hit, and yes, they are trying to censor our speech. But YouTube will figure out a way to placate the big companies, and they will all be back. YouTube will be incorporated by the entertainment industry, and all those celebrities that are so annoying right now, and seem to align behind the regressives, will eventually realize that YouTube is where it's at, and they'd better get on board if they want to stay relevant. It also means that we will have less freedom, but don't worry, we will figure out new ways to have a riot. So don't worry about the money right now. After all, we were getting screwed even before this attack. I would not be able to make money from this video even if I did monetize it, because all the ad revenue would have gone to the people who hold the copyright to the music I've used. Imagine that all the revenue of a Hollywood movie would have gone to those who own the music used in the soundtrack. That would be ridiculous, but that's how it is on YouTube, because the internet video is not a respectable art form yet. Eventually we will get a better deal, and then will be the time to cash in. For now, party on, and be excellent to each other. There is one plotline in our story that remains unresolved. One character whose fate we didn't mention. We left Richard Berry back in the 50s, holding $750 after selling the rights for a song that would go on to make countless millions. In the early years of rock and roll, a lot of fun was had by everyone, but financially they all got screwed. Instead of rolling in dough, Berry went on to have a career of singing in nightclubs, hustling hard to make a living. But then, in the 1980s, when the rock industry was rolling billions of dollars, some entrepreneur lawyers realized that they can make money by representing the old rock and roll musicians and getting some blade justice for them. Richard Berry was one of them, and in 1985 he got back the rights to Louie, allowing him to live comfortably from then on. Our society may not be perfect, but it does fix itself, and with a bit of luck, it allows you to both make a living and have fun.
The real stuff.
So, put on your togas, and keep on having fun. The riot police have arrived, the wardens are closing in. We are at the 47th hour. But at the moment, still,